All right. 1 second here. Should be uploading that. Uh, we looks like see, make sure everything is good here. And we are live. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Evolution Podcast. And today we have a special guest. Today I have Jason. Now, Jason is going to be talking about everything financial industry. If you're in the financial industry space, you are going to want to pay attention to. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jason Perrier. I'm a financial planner in Toronto, Canada, but I'm also involved in many causes and associations. I'm the president of the Financial Planning Association of Canada. I am a director of the Institute of Advanced Financial Planning for the Institute of Advanced Financial Planners, and also a director of the Individual Finance and Insurance Decision Center.
Oh man, that sounds like a lot. So, how did you originally get into it?
So it's a funny story. When I was in high school, I was staring at the barrel going to university. I had no idea what I wanted to be, and didn't want to go to university and end up blowing money on a degree that I was never going to, use. So I walked into my high school's co-op department where they were going to place me with a whatever company or whatever job they could find me with. They asked me what I was interested in, and as a teenage boy interested in money, of course, the stock market was seemed interesting. So I suggested that, and they ended up placing me with one of the largest brokers and one of the largest financial institutions in the country, which was a 4-month co-op term that turned into a summer job, that turned into a come back when you have time off work, that turned into a continue to do work while in school, to a full-time job when I was done university. And so that's how I got into it.
So, what's your experience been so far?
With the in what capacity? With the industry itself, or with what do you want to know?
No, just in the industry so far, because the financial industry is an you have a lot
Yeah,
of people who don't make it in, right? So,
yeah.
What's the experience been so far for you?
Look, yeah, we'll talk about the not making it in a second, what the problem is, but like my experience was basically that I came into it, and it was a great learning ground because I got to do a little bit of everything for this advisor, and that included everything from research to performance reviews to financial planning. Even though at the time I was not really qualified for it, I was playing around with it. And what I found was that a lot of what we were chasing was things we couldn't control. Right? It was a lot of trying to chase return or find the next, or try to, give money to the guy who could pick the future best, and that was in a lot of ways fruitless. And then, but I saw in financial planning the ability that I could help people organize their lives, and these small changes could have massive deviations in their long term wellness. And I realized, okay, this is what I should spend my time on, right? And that's really where the focus changed. And while it was a wonderful experience, by the time I was done, I was leaving the banks. I was kind of done with that environment. There was no metric for client success. It was all about hitting certain targets and quotas, and there was always, sales pressures that existed there. And it was not something I wanted to be a part of. So I wanted to leave and find a way to basically work in the industry that was more mutually beneficial between myself and the client. That's where I left and helped start another practice, and eventually I left that and started my own practice with the business partner. And basically, that's where my current company, Woodgate, came from. So the real problem, and the entire people not making it, and the washout rate. Look, the washout rate, especially in the financial advisor space, is very high. It's estimated to be like 90%, quite honestly, in the first year.
Wow.
And the reason for it is quite simple. It's because they attract a lot of people these days, telling them, one of two messages. Either it's about them making money, which if it's about them making money, run a mile away from these people. Like, in
Mhm.
fact, when young people come to me and say, I'm interested in what it is you do, and the answer is, the first question I ask is why. If they say, well, the money, I'm just like, get out. Like, I've got no time for this,
Interesting.
right? The reality is that at the core of its job of financial planning, there's lots of different jobs in the financial services. The core of its job in financial services, it is about taking people's wealth and giving them the best version of their lives in one or multiple capacities, and helping them achieve that. So if you can't recognize the burden of care and the duty and the fact that we're trying to achieve like positive life outcomes, then I'm not really interested in having that conversation, because I know where your priorities are. So the two messages that I was going back to is, one is, hey, this is a way to make a lucrative living. But the other one is also what I just said. They'll talk about how, financial planning and financial advice can have this incredible positive impact on people's lives, which is absolutely true. But then they train you up barely, bare minimum training, because they don't want to waste too much money just in case you don't succeed. And then they give you a phone and computer and say, okay, now go sell. Right. And it's
Mhm.
like, Either you're in a branch environment where there are people just walking in and basically
Mm-hmm.
you have to sell to meet whatever quota or whatever you're being told to do. And they can deny that they have quotas all they want. But I mean, I get too many reports internally from advisors who've lost their jobs or being threatened to be fired because of the lack of selling certain products or enough of any certain thing. Or basically on the independent space, it's like sink or swim. It's like, here's the phone, sell your friends and family. Well, you better not run
Mm-hmm.
out of those, and you better start building a practice. So when you think about when you think about that and what it takes to succeed in that regard, short of having a lot of wealthy friends and family who are willing to trust you from day one with their wealth, with their financial welfare, it's hard to start from zero, right? Especially
Mm-hmm.
when a company like that is giving you like 6 months to a year to prove yourself, and then they're booting you. The reality is, when people go independent from scratch and start from zero, it takes a good 2 or 3 years of struggle of basically building that business, which is then going to feed you going forward. And it's funny because a lot of people, will try to defend an old model whereby commissions are fat and whatnot as a means of saying that's how
Mm-hmm.
we can get young people to survive in this business. And my response is, how many businesses? Why is it that this industry seems to think that people should be able to start in this business and have their own business and earn six figures from day one? It makes no
Mm-hmm.
sense. The reality is, you look at any other business that starts from zero, there's a period of struggle where they ramp up and they build their client base. We are like no one, we are just like every other business, but for whatever reason, the industry likes to pretend like it's not.
Okay. So now, I have been in the financial industry, for quite a bit. And I was kind of on that expectation where they were like, hey, you need to go to your top 25. And when you make a list of your top 25, you can go ahead and, they'll jump on and, we'll sell them the product. And what it was, my friends and family did not know me as this guy that, this expert, financial industry guy. They didn't know me as that. So
Well, you weren't.
unfortunately,
To be fair, you were starting out. You weren't.
yeah, when I came in, it was, and I was like, hey, let me talk to you about your money and manage your money. They're like, dude, what's this talking about, dude? This doesn't make any sense because obviously the relationship that was built was not built in that perspective.
No.
Now, in your in obviously you said it. It's very much a wrong mindset to get into, industry saying how much money can I make. It's better to get into industry and say, you know what, how can I help these people? But how were you able to navigate the rough patches that obviously came when you obviously were, in the industry space?
When I was starting out and not
Yeah, when
much
you were
money
starting out,
started
yeah.
zero, look,
Yeah.
it was, you know, I basically leaped into someone else's practice that helped. They had an existing small practice that I helped build from there. And then when I started again at zero, I wasn't leaving with zero clients. I had clients that were coming with me, but it was lean, right? It was definitely lean. So by then I'd already built up. Originally when became an advisor, I was the junior, right? I was basically seen as the young guy who was learning this stuff. And frankly, I spent the great thing about starting out is that you have a bunch of time. It's a blessing and a
Mm-hmm.
curse. And unfortunately, I would always know that young advisors are going to succeed or fail. So if I, find these young advisors basically like on the course on a Thursday. No, like just because you have that time, you've not earned that.
Yeah.
Just because you have free time doesn't mean you've earned that. It means you basically are just wasting time at this point. So the what I would do is quite simply I'd educate myself. I'd spend a ton of time reading, studying, taking courses, in addition to spending time prospecting and meeting people and putting myself in new situations and networking. And really, it was about building myself as that professional to the point where instead of so many people who have this, who basically, everybody starts off with a bit of an imposter syndrome, right? I wanted to get
Mm-hmm.
through that. I wanted to stop being an imposter as fast as possible. Some people never mature beyond that, right? Because they spend so much time just trying to sell and survive that they never build the skill set to not be the imposter, right? So a lot of it was, again, like what it should have been. It should have been me dealing with simpler cases and easier stuff and building up that knowledge and that familiarity and working alongside people while they did more complex things, right? So that was in the first stage. And then when I went back to zero, I was able to hit the ground running faster because I had that ability. I had that knowledge. Now that said, for everybody who tells you that they'll support you when you do your own thing, when you start doing it, they'll say things like, let's see if you get through the first year or so, right? Which is ironic because if they just gave you the business, the ability of surviving the first year is greater. So there's always a reticence, and people should be reticent because it is their life savings, it is their investments, it is their future's ambitions. So the reality is that I went back to zero, and just honestly, it's just a grind. It's self improvement, working on the practice, You have a lot of time to work on the practice on how you're going to do it, a lot of time to market, and a lot of time to network, and just building that up. And it was 2 very lean years of building up, and yeah, not a lot of money in, a lot of money out, but eventually you get to a certain point where that money starts coming in every month, and you have stability, and then you can continue to grow from there. So it's like any other business. You got to build it one client at a time.
Got you. So how are you marketing the business to get more people in?
I think it's different now than it was before. Like then, I had a pretty decent client network already. I had a bunch of professionals in my network, and I had done a little bit of media, not a lot. I would say that if I was starting today, I'd tell everybody the same thing. The best thing you do when you're starting today is do two things. A, find a niche of consumer that has very specific needs. People who are in the same industry or same situation in life, and figure out what it is that they have that's very specific to them. Design a niche practice around servicing those people. And then once you figure that piece out, content market the hell out of it. Just produce blog posts, tweet, LinkedIn posts, video, whatever it is, podcast, and specifically market to those people, because the fastest way to success when it comes to this now is to basically not try to be all things to all people. Most people in my industry will tell you the same thing. They say, I service, and my website's guilty of this to some degree, but I got beyond it, and I'll tell you how. Um, they'll say, when you ask them who they service, the answer is, well, my clients are business owners, executives, and family and high net worth families. To which my response is always, okay, so thanks. You deal with people with money. What do you do differently for all of them? And the answer is typically a blank stare. They have no answer. They don't even know because they never thought about it. They're just chasing money, and that's how they describe their categories in three different categories. My website mentions those three categories, but what we do is we talk about specific services built around those three, right? So this was a website I built over 10 years ago. I got to get back to fixing it and overhauling it. But the point here is that it was very much around, hey, we're going to provide services specialized around those people. Now I would go a lot deeper than that right now. I've got friends who are basically working in categories like midwives and people in people transitioning into retirement, people who are dealing with their parents who are starting to deal with their parents who are becoming incapacitated, right? So like figure out a group of people, whether that be a profession or whether that be a life need, and market the heck out of it. Because the reality is that when you're out there trying to compete for everyone, you're out there competing with everyone, and you're also not building a deep knowledge. When you're out there marketing to one type of person, what someone wants is for the person they meet with when they're looking for an advisor to speak their exact language. Oh, you have this challenge? Well, oh yeah, no, I got clients I do tons of clients like this, and this is what's happened with them and their billing rates because of the market. This is what's happened with them here, and just be able to like the client, they want you to almost fill in the blanks on their lives. If they can hear you tell them what their life is after they give you a little bit of information, that's like, oh my God, this person understands me before I've even said anything, right? So you do that, and you can own that space. You can absolutely own that space, and you just niche market the heck out of that, and you just basically just do tons of content around that, and that way you want to become the default. And Canada's way behind on this. You look at the US, there's a lot more of this going on. I've seen niches around some crazy ones like champion fisherman, believe it or not. Pro athletes specifically, or actually the only one I found the other day was trainers and coaches in the NFL, right? Another one was another one's around dental. Was it ophthalmologist practitioners within the tri-state area looking to sell their practice in the next 5 years to a private equity firm? Talk about niche. Another one I came across was basically dealing with women in technology who were mid-career, right? And what those things all have in common is that when you actually, their specific group, right? Like when you visit a website and you see that description, that's either you or it's not you, right? But when you know it's you and you keep reading and you see them address your life concerns and the things that specifically happen to you,
Mm-hmm.
my goodness, that is so much more powerful than the person who deals with business owners, executives, and high net worth families. Right. If I was to tell you, if you were asked what my current niche is and how I currently market myself to other people, it's
Mm-hmm.
very simple. I deal with two specific categories of complexity in client lives. One is cross border. Deal with a lot of Canadians, Americans living in Canada, and dealing with the cross-border complexities of dealing with two tax codes. So I deal with that. The other one is business owners, but specifically business owners who basically achieved a level of success and complexity whereby, hey, the money's rolling in. My accountants had me set up this corporate structure. People are pitching me all this insurance. I'm so busy with all this with these operations. I just want to be able to sell this thing packaged up and retire in the next 10 to 15 years. I don't understand everything being thrown at me. I don't want to be at the middle of all these lawyers and accountants and other specialists, right? And I step in there and I basically am able to collaborate with all the professionals and basically bring clarity to the entire decision, to the entire process, and take all the, because at that point they've got, I like to say, it's really successful business owners have gotten to a level where the business is basically just trudging along, doing great, and you see the exit, but you know you're a long way from it, and you're dealing with a lot of complexity that doesn't involve running the business. It's running your, how do you marry those two worlds? So that's really where I kind of really step in and do my best work.
So when picking a niche, right? Because a lot of people,
Yep.
you spoke about the general base where everyone's like, hey, my
Uh,
clientele is all business owners. And then now you're not speaking to a message to a specific group. How do you know that you're picking the right niche? That's the first question. And then also
yeah.
just a follow-up question to that would be is how do you trust yourself that you're actually going to, one, picking the right niche, and you know that you're actually able to be of value to that specific niche?
Well, this is the thing. So the first question is, can you be of value to that niche, right? Is there a group of people whose experience and challenges are common enough that you need to have, you can provide additional value beyond everybody else because of the experience, because of their shared experience, that you can speak their language, that you can basically, that you know what things have to be done and not be done. So is there a commonality to these people? Can you provide value? And third, is the market sufficiently large enough that you can make a living off of it? That's the reality of it, right? And then and then it becomes a game of numbers around capacity, right? Because the reality is that one of the things I talk about all the time is that advisors cannot take an infinite number of clients on. Look at the average number of households per advisor in this country, and the surveys end up somewhere between 250 and 350 households, right? The reality is that now do the math on, let's say 300. Divide the number of hours in the year by 300. How many days are you actually spending with any one of those groups? You'd be lucky to spend one full day's worth. Never mind all the, everything else you got to do from. And then also, people don't want an experience where they call an advisor and the advisor says, "Hold on a sec, let me look you up in my CRM and look at what our last conversation was about. Let me put you on hold for a minute
Mm-hmm.
while I catch up on my notes." They don't want that. They want you to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, John, how's it going? Yeah, so yeah, Susie had broke her leg last month. How's she doing with that? Okay, great. Yeah, and Beth is graduating this year, isn't she? Oh, good. What school did she get into?" Like the person who understands without you having to explain who these people are, what's going on in their lives, remembers the last conversation. So reality is that you look at that, you look at something called the Dunbar number, which basically established, which is a concept about how many relationships we can keep straight in our head. That number is somewhere between 100 and 200, averaging 150, somewhere around there. So you get rid of friends, you include friends and family in that number, and just in terms of relationships, and now you're down to like a sub 100. So when you think about, so you're basically like for if you're gonna have really deep relationships with your clients, you're talking 50 to 100 households. That's not a lot, right? So the question becomes, does the niche support that 50 to 100 household model? If it doesn't, because there's not enough money there, or there's not enough wealth or not enough revenue there, then you have to consider a model that is a little bit more commoditized. That's a little bit more like, hey, I'm going to have one meeting with you per year. The rest of the stuff is going to basically be done remotely, and essentially, I'm going to not do this white glove service. So really, you have to design. So to go back to your question, the key is there a group of people that has a commonality where value can be delivered? Can I provide said value? And basically build a niche around this. Is this revenue? Is there a revenue source that supports an actual niche? And lastly, can I develop the business model, whether that be few numbers, high touch, or large numbers, low touch, that is both a accessible or acceptable to that industry, and b delivers the value I'm looking to provide. That's what you want to do, right? So all of those things have to align for it to work. But when it works, the data out of the US is interesting. I've seen a couple of various surveys over the last couple of years. First year, you're establishing yourself. Second year, you're basically continuing to establish yourself. By the time the third year happens, you're starting to see traction, right? People are the professionals you've spoken to, the people in that group you've spoken to, they are all starting to recognize the fact that you are the guy for that, because you're the one who specifically says, I specialize in what it is you do, right? And basically, when that happens, it starts to pick up like a hockey stick after. Now, one other caveat: broad niches may as well be no niches, right? So the more broad you are, the worse it is. So lots of people out there saying, hey, I cater to doctors. Yeah, so do a lot of advisors. So do a lot of advisors, right? Now, if you were to get hyper specific, if I, specifically, I'm just picking something out of thin air, right? I specifically deal with cardiologists who basically are in a certain life stage. Why? Maybe that group of people has something unique, different to every other doctor that there is. I don't know. right? But maybe there is. And if there is, then maybe I can build an actual practice solely around that.
You definitely mentioned a lot of things there, and I think if I'm going to recap what for the most part what you were saying is I'm getting into business. The first 3 years of business, I have to understand that the first 3 years of business are usually the business where the dead zone, where I'm basically trying to establish myself, establish,
Exactly.
who I am for the most part. But you also mentioned something which is very important as far as, getting a select basically group of customers in a sense is to niching down so much you don't have to basically cater to 1,000 people. You can basically cater to the ones that you could CRM, right? And trying to go
Well, you can
like
still use
maybe
a CR. You should still use a CRM, but you shouldn't have to require when they call you.
yeah, for the most part, yeah, obviously, yeah, but for the most part what you're talking about is basically being personable, being a
Yep.
human being first before you see them as like a dollar bill or like
Correct.
in that way, shape, or form. But majority here's my thing is majority of people who get into any business whatsoever, whatever, even financial services or whatever it may be, never get in with the perspective of I have to, the time frame. So how are you able to basically think long term? Because it's almost from what you're describing, it's almost as though I was like, okay, you know what, the next first 5 years is going to suck, but I'll be able to, start to see traction. For example,
Mhm.
I don't know if you understand my question per se.
Well, how do you push through the sacrifice the hard years into with an eye on the long run?
Yeah, how do you, because obviously adding value is something that you can do, but then again, it's how are you able to push through for the most part, because the first 5 years of any business is just not
It's
is
leaner. Yeah. Look, I mean, the same question can be asked of any entrepreneur. And I think it's one of these things where, look, the overnight success is celebrated in society. What's not an overnight success, what's basically not celebrated is the overnight success that took 20 years to get there, right? Like that's the reality of it.
Mhm.
It's that these things, they're with depending on the nature of the business, and most businesses are like that. It's that they're if you do the right thing, it compounds, right? One client becomes two clients, becomes four clients, and over time, you start with zero, but you start building a mass improvement, right? And it's really about seeing the understanding the long-term goal while also zooming in and understanding the short-term actions. You have to have both in mind, right? And
Mhm.
it's basically understanding the long-term goal is to get X done, but today I need to do X and Y to survive, and I need to do X and Y to set that foundation. There's a saying that we overestimate what we can accomplish in a day, but we underestimate what we can accomplish in a year, let alone many years. So the reality is success is there. Success is there if you do the right things over and over again on a daily basis. Now, mind you, when you start off on a daily basis, you're starting from literally the bottom of the mountain, right? So you have to always keep that perspective of, hey, I'm making progress. If you ever say to yourself that, you know what, basically I'm never going to get there. The second you say I'm never going to get there and you believe it, you're done.
True, true. No, true. So how does the financial market differ as far as, because like if the U.S. is advertising, hey, there might be a recession right here,
Mm.
how does that necessarily affect what you necessarily do for your clients in the Canadian market?
It doesn't. I mean, look, a first thing to do is invest in a diversified way globally, right? So no one jurisdiction is 100% of your assets. That said, I mean, yes, U.S. market's always going to be big in everyone's portfolio if they're doing a market cap weight because the U.S. market's so big. But the reality is that what people say is what people say. It's not what happens. The popular saying is economists have predicted all 150 of the last 10 recessions. These things, no one really knows what's going to happen, and that's the thing to remember.
True.
And the market is in a lot of ways a voting machine, right? So by the time you're hearing about it in the news, it's already been considered, it's already been digested. It's a complex adaptive system that basically takes in all the information that basically happens, and everybody who's staring at everything that comes in and all the algorithms that are pointed towards it are processing the information faster than the human brain can and acting on it. So by the time you actually, this is why I always laugh when people are like, oh, I pick my stocks by reading the newspaper. It's like, you really think reading yesterday's news is going to give you is basically
Yeah,
going to have an impact? No, like
yeah.
anything that was in there was factored into the price before the ink was even put on the page, right?
Mm,
So you can't spend your time working about that. The only thing you can really control when it comes to investing is basically your risk exposure, right? Your risk exposure, which basically means like don't expose yourself to more risk in your portfolio than you should be able to tolerate, and then basically ride it out. And any efforts to time this and try to say I'm going to make moves or get in or get out. Look, there's a reason active management underperforms passive. It's because no one can predict the future, and trying to time getting in and out. Those are two separate decisions. Trying to get them both right is borderline impossible. And there's never been anyone who's actually done that consistently. Because if they would make Warren Buffett look like he had nothing.
Yeah. So what advice do you because you when you advise your client, what advice do you necessarily provide to them? Let's say I'm coming to your average portfolio under management for the most part.
My average portfolio, I mean, look, it's so the portfolio is only part of the entire process. So the process is really basically starting off with a deep dive financial plan, understand them inside and out, right? So we make sure we understand who they are, what they have, what's coming to them, where it's going to, and what it is they want out of life. And then we put together a plan for how they're going to get there, right? And then the second part of that is the investments, which we'll come back to. But then we also take them through, like we take them to this process with 5 meetings. So financial plan, investment, insurance, tax, estate planning, wrap it all up. And there's other meetings specifically for different niches that are getting thrown in there. But on the investment piece, it's very straightforward. The first thing we're trying to identify is what is your risk tolerance? So what is the maximum risk tolerance you can take? And we have tools that have been validated by empirical research to basically prove that they work. And that basically tells us this is as much equity exposure as we can give people, right? Because that's where the risk primarily comes from. Bonds as well, but not as much. So basically, what is their maximum risk tolerance? Then what are the different goals they have? Okay. Do these goals have different timelines? If they have different timelines, then I have to design portfolios around each of those timelines, right? So something that needs to happen next year cannot afford to take risk. Something that's happening in 5 years can take risk, but not as much as something that's going to happen for 20, 30 years. So basically figuring out what the allocation is for all three of those scenarios. Then it's a question of execution. So what am I going to buy in order to put them into it? And what we always start off with is showing them a broad-based ETF, diversified portfolio. So broad-based market portfolio where they're going to own basically everything in the allocation that's specific to them. And that's great because it's the starting point and it's also the low cost option. Then we support three other different types of models. The next one we support is our factor-based models, which basically are based off academic research, which effectively create an alternative index and tilt portfolios towards smaller, cheaper, and more profitable companies as a means of capturing those premiums over time. And then we have our ESG, so our social responsible investing portfolios, which follow the same two philosophies. And then we have our impact portfolios, which are fossil fuel free, which were developed on behalf of simple clients who had very deep personal reasons for why they wanted that exclusion. So what we do is on that investment meeting, we go through what it is we're trying to achieve, what the risk tolerance looks like, what that means in terms of upside, downside, make sure that we've kind of like captured that they're comfortable with the historical best and worst case scenarios. Then we show them, then we go into our investment philosophy and explain to them the entire passive versus active debate and show them the actual data surrounding that. And then we make recommendations. And it's basically, we show them at least two options and we'll show them sometimes up to the four. And we'll if they're interested in the ESG and the impact, we'll show them those. But effectively, we'll show them all of these and take them through the narrative. And then we'll have a discussion about where they're best suited. And that's it. So what are they holding? They're holding everything. They're just holding it in different allocations.
Got you. So okay, no, that's interesting, and that's a lot to process, obviously, because you've been doing this for quite a bit. Now, with the introduction of artificial intelligence into the industry space, into the business space, I mean, ChatGPT came out. I think what came out what in November? Was it November? It became public.
Can't remember when it was, but it feels like it still feels new to me. But yeah.
Yeah. So what impact do you think? Because I had another podcast last week or the week before, and he didn't think AI was going to play much of a big role per se. But what role do you think artificial intelligence is going to play in the
No,
investment side?
like the appearance of ChatGPT and large language models into the popular culture is a seminal moment in technology history. Like that's the reality. But like, when is the last technology that came out that captured that many people's imaginations that quickly and scared that many people for that matter? The reality, and really the way to describe it, best description I've heard of it is like a calculator for words, right? It is basically going to it basically can process information in a way that we weren't able to process before technologically, at least for the most part. Um, how is it going to change things? It's definitely going to change things. Why is it going to do that? It's going to do things change things in two ways. A, the back office functionality, and B, the front office functionality. So the back
Okay.
office functionality, all the processing and the data work. Look, we now have other tools to now extract data from multiple sources and serve it up, unstructured data from multiple sources, and serve it up in a digestible, accurate way. So case in point, I'm working with a company out of the UK called Cypha, who's an artificial intelligence company specifically in large language models for financial advisors. And one of the things we're looking at doing, and one of the things that's being done now, is integration into different platforms, so that effectively you can create a private collaborating profile off of all that information. And you can also upload questionnaires, whatever, meeting transcripts, whatever you want, meeting recordings. It will adjust that all, and it will do a number of things. It will build a profile. It will allow you to ask you questions as to what's going on with that client. So for example, I could say, what was the balance on their mortgage the last time and when was the last time they updated this? Boom, it'll pull it up on demand from whatever source, whatever source it's buried in. The reality is, it's like, in a lot of ways, it's like throwing a bunch of documents and paperwork that you don't have the time to read into something. The machine is reading it for you and extracting the information. So if you think that's not going to have a massive impact in terms of efficiency for those who harnessed it, it's going to have an impact. Also, I've been working in collaboration with a company called Conquest for a while, which is a financial planning software company that through artificial intelligence and algorithms at financial planning. And really, the amount of time that it takes to produce a financial plan on their platform because of their AI agent has been reduced substantially. I mean, Michael Kitces in the US has benchmarked the amount of time to produce a financial plan around 10 hours, start to finish. Now that includes, discovery and presentation, and also the plan, the input and all the plan development piece. Well, the plan development piece for even simple plans was, could take over an hour, for complex plans, several hours. That's now down to like minutes. It's down to minutes on simple cases and very little time on complex cases. So yes, these efficiencies, there is no one killer app. It's not like suddenly someone's going to launch Advisor GPT where like, hey, it's going to replace advisors. It's not that. Like any other technology, those who harness it are going to become infinitely more productive. Right. So those are back office functions. Front office functions, I'm already using it on a daily basis. I have it draft emails for me all the time, right? Longer emails than I would write. Specifically, like someone will contact me about like wanting, I may have replied to your podcast on this one when you requested this, right? So for example, someone messaged me requesting me to be a podcast. I simply just pop into Grammarly Go, which is their artificial intelligence bot, go in there and say, respond to email accepting the invitation to run the podcast, ask for details, and boom, it'll produce the copy paste done, right? I use that a couple times a day now, right? So the reality is that, and those are just simple examples. I mean, there are countless examples that I keep on finding. I got a presentation in September at a conference on artificial intelligence, and I haven't even started building it yet. Why? Because everything's changing so fast. I'm just cataloging stuff I want to include at this point, right? But the reality is that there is no one killer app right now. There are lots of little apps that are having small incremental impacts on my day-to-day life. Adding together, and the efficiency gains are huge, right? So simple example, like, again, to steal from Michael Kitces because he comes up with everything. The question he wants to ask was, would you pay $100 $100? I think it was like $100 a year or $100 a month for a go back. It was $100 a year for a app that basically saved you 1 minute per day, right? Well, 365 minutes in over the course of a year, right? Divide that by 60, you're talking about several hours. If you can't earn more than $100 in several hours, then something's wrong, right? So that efficiency gain is enormous. And what we're looking at now is we're looking at basically the early innings of this, where there's all these tiny efficiency gains. What's going to happen is if you start harnessing these, you're going to benefit, but you're also going to be used to actually dealing with this equipment, with this technology when it starts hitting the bigger things. So I'll tell you right now, every major technology platform out there that hasn't integrated something like this will have it done, or at least announced within the next 24 months. I know, for example, Salesforce is currently working on their large language model tool to basically point out to advisors. They're beta testing it now. So picture that, the CRM, which is a dumping ground for everything, now having that completely embedded within it, right? All the portfolio management softwares I talk to are also doing it. And I'm seeing this done for both support, but also actioning the actual software. So the learning curve on what it's going to mean to work with software is going to decrease as well. So yes, is this going to have an impact? Absolutely, it's going to have an impact. But it's going to have an impact in a way that's like, it's like infrastructure, like everything. Like, how much did the internet have an impact on everything, right? It became an underlying infrastructure for everything we do. This is going to become an underlying infrastructure for so much of what we do as well. And it's hard to basically really account for just how much of a productivity gain that's going to be.
Interesting. So now, just out of curiosity, there, the dot-com bubble. Everybody said in the '90s that this is the thing. This is the thing, right? And then obviously there was boom, right? And then a bunch of startups went under, right? How much do you think that this AI thing is also getting that much of a hype that
Well, it is. Well, it totally is. I mean, right now, every venture capitalist wants to know what it is you're doing with AI, right? The look, here's the thing. Those are two separate issues. One is the underlying technology. Here's the thing about the dot-com bubble. They were right. They were right. At the end of the day, it changed everything, didn't it? Right?
mm,
The internet changed everything. And a lot of the companies and a lot of those business models that went under back in the day now exist as successful companies. They were just too early. The industry wasn't ready. That's the reality of it.
mm,
So a lot of those things were right. Just there was Ray Kurzweil. It was a guy who wrote several books, including The Singularity is Near, talking about artificial intelligence and all kinds of stuff. He's a proficient inventor, and what he says is that a lot of these inventions that come out and fail, they don't fail because they're bad ideas. They fail because the technology and the time is just wrong, right? So trying to basically have the idea and the technology support it and the market ready at the same time is the crucial point of all of this, right? So we had the big epiphany that was ChatGPT come out, and boom, this technology is dead. This is crazy. Yes, startups all over the place. There are, the number, I'm on a couple of newsletters on new AIs coming out, the number of things that people are either tinkering with as a possible business or starting up a business or getting funded on as a business. It's enormous. So absolutely, there is a massive freaking gold rush right now, just like there was a gold rush into crypto a couple years ago,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Just
there
like there was a
was.
gold rush into every technology that comes into it. So basically, that's what happens. Now, what's going to happen is the vast majority are going to fail. A few very big ones are going to emerge and they're going to succeed. But the underlying technological infrastructure that gets laid down will be embedded into everything. And that is going to basically change the way we work going forward. And, if we're having this conversation in 5 to 7 years' time, the reality is you're sitting, you're probably wondering why it wasn't, you're probably saying, well, remember back when we had to type everything in and look for stuff for ourselves and research it ourselves as opposed to just tell the thing what it was we wanted and it gave us an answer? It's a big difference. I mean, that's just a simple
Right.
example. I mean, there's any number of other things it does. Like my one of my friends is a programmer, uses ChatGPT to basically to streamline his code. He'll write code and he'll pop it in and say, make this more efficient, and boom, it returns the code back to him differently, and it basically is more efficient.
Now, okay, so what's interesting is it's like like there's that tunnel vision, right? And business owners, and there's a lot of businesses that are, you know, leveraging AI, leveraging ChatGPT, but there's also a majority of the population that doesn't even know it exists. Like I talk to a lot of people, hey, have you heard of ChatGPT? And they're like, what is ChatGPT? What is that? What is
Yep.
ChatGPT? And now there's also a lot of people that use ChatGPT for bad, right? So now in the consumer perspective, right, how can consumers discern this is human, this is genuinely human content, and versus, hey, this is AI? Like when you emailed me, I was like, hey man, I thought it was you typing it.
Yeah, look, it's going to be very hard. I mean, like we've all seen the crazy stuff out there. We've seen the deep fakes that like scare people. We've seen,
Mm-hmm.
we've heard music from dead rappers that like never existed before. Drake and Drake and the Weekend had to sue like someone or to take down, or the label had to sue someone to take down a song they never wrote. Right, like we're beyond the looking glass on some of this stuff. Right, like it is a little bit frightening how easily convincing this is. Now that said, there's also artificial intelligence to detect the artificial intelligence. It's always an arms race. So how can the average person tell? The reality is that it comes down to superficiality is easy, depth is hard, right?
Mm.
So what I mean by that, the more what I remember when I saw ChatGPT, the first thing I said was, "Wow, the amount of BS nonsense content that's going to be produced is going to go through the roof," right? Because now I think even BuzzFeed got rid of a bunch of writers because of it. It's like you can go in and say, give me the top 5 things I should worry about when planning for my retirement," and boom, there's my social media post, right? That's easy. Going deep on all the stuff you should know and showing a level of proficiency when it comes to content, that's how you know the difference. So, of course, not everybody's going to write the super technical manual on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum, it's like the super simple stuff. Somewhere in between, there's basically a level of sophistication. that is going to be evident and not. Now, so simple communications like, by the way, I accept blah, blah, blah. Thanks very much for the invite. You're not going to be able to tell, quite honestly. You're not, right?
Mm,
But if someone tries to con you and basically uses artificial intelligence to do it, the more detailed questions you ask, or the more detail you try to get, or if there's not a lot of detail, the more detail you can expose yourself to, the more likely it is to be wrong. Because here's the thing about ChatGPT, it's wrong all the time. Wrong all the time. Why? Because it's not perfect, right? It's trying to guess probabilistically at what it is you're trying to get at, right? So um, for example, and also it's learning from everybody. So simple examples of how it's going wrong. My programmer buddy, he found that essentially what was happening was that as time went on, every time he asked it to optimize code, it started optimizing codes on older and older versions of that language. Why? Because
mm,
what was probably happening was enough people were using it enough on those older versions of the language that was starting to default to that, right? So that's what happens when you service everybody, right? It's servicing everybody's trying to get. It's a probability that guy was looking to do the same thing the other people were. Or there was that
mm,
case that's now famous of the lawyer who basically went to court, used ChatGPT, and got thrown out and got fined because he cited a case that didn't exist. You have to tell
mm,
ChatGPT not to make stuff up, because think about it, people are often asking it to create fiction, right? So
mm,
the reality is that there's the more information it gives you, the more likely something is to be wrong. And that's what to look out for. The scariest stuff is the voice mimicking stuff, because I mean, I have a buddy who did a video on this as a kind of warning, and his entire video, it wasn't his voice, it was the machine speaking, right? So it only takes a couple of seconds of a voice clip to actually replicate someone's voice now. So we're starting to see this in the grandparent scam, where people call up and get called up by someone who claims to be their grandkid, and
mm.
scams them out of money, right? So this is getting more sophisticated. So it's hard. I'm going to tell you right now that the next decade or so, we're going to see some incredible stories of people getting taken in the most spectacular ways because of artificial intelligence and any number of and things like deepfakes.
Mm. Okay, now let's look at it from a perspective of, well, obviously we've understood from a perspective of need to protect themselves, right? Now, what industries, obviously, BuzzFeed, replacing, right? I think obviously copywriting is one where ChatGPT is going to pretty much come in and dominate the space. What industries
Well,
do
hold on.
you?
Let's go back to what it is. It's
Okay.
going to augment the space. Yes, it'll reduce the total number of headcount, but the people who are left behind are basically more efficient, right? This is all about it. This is all an efficiency play.
Okay. Interesting. Now, what industries do you think moving forward in the next 10 to 20 years are actually going to thrive off of artificial intelligence?
Um, I think it's I think it's harder to. Okay, so that's a difficult one. So here's the thing about the AI. My belief is that basically it's harder for everyone, so it definitely impacts the knowledge space, right? So anyone who's not like physical labor, it's not replacing that, right? So that's safe, right? Now everybody else who's in any kind of services business where you're physically moving, that's safe. It's really anyone in knowledge work where this is going to affect them. Now here's the challenge: people at the bottom end of the spectrum in terms of knowledge work became less valuable.
Mm,
Why? Because the chat GPT can probably do a faster, possibly better job than them. The people at the upper end of the spectrum, the more specialized the knowledge you have, the more deep the knowledge you have is, the more you're able to recognize the errors of the AI, the more valuable you just became,
mm,
right? The more valuable you just became because you become in a lot of ways the check on the AI. But beyond that, not only do you check on the AI, it's like at the end of the day, the systems need people to basically not just check, improve them, and validate. And
mm,
you're not going to, someone else is going to, you can ask a super complex question of it. You read it without that knowledge of that field of that thing. You're like, okay, that reads like it's right. Because the thing about ChatGPT is it always sounds confident. It always sounds like it knows what it's talking about, doesn't it?
mm,
But it could be dead wrong. And only if
mm,
you have to know enough to basically call that out. So the people at the upper end of the spectrum who understand all this and can take, even the most complex extraneous things, they became more valuable because now they're also validation.
mm. Interesting. No, that's good. Now, obviously, as we're wrapping up here, where can people?
So people can find me in a couple places. Best place to go is to jasonperrier.ca. That's where all my content marketing gets done effectively. My company name is woodgate.com, and I'm online, particularly on Twitter, Jason Pereira at Jason Pereira. and now Threads, Jason and Pereira. We'll see how long that lasts.
Okay, okay, okay. Now, okay, as we're wrapping up here, I wanna go ahead and I call them my dumb slash fun questions. I had a guest who said, "Oh no, no questions are dumb. Let's make it fun questions here." So
All right.
obviously, you have a lot of certifications, right? So with all those certifications, do you ever forget which one you have?
No, I actually don't. I don't. No, they're all my children in some way. What can I say?
Okay. So now, as a financial expert, do you always win a Monopoly?
Given that my current Monopoly games are played almost exclusively with my children, I try not to win at Monopoly until
That's
they get
that's
older. Then
nice.
they learn a lesson.
Yeah. Then it gets brutal. Now this is a not really. This is not really. In the fun question part. You seem to me, obviously, just by looking at the bookshelf right behind you, that you read books, right?
Hmm.
Book would you say right now has made the most impact in your life?
Oof, that is a
Just
tough
one.
one. Just one. I mean, there's the challenges is that in what capacity, what scope, right? Like, what are we talking about? So let's just talk about just as a human being, okay? And I'll say, I think I'll go with an old one. I'll go with Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Okay? It is a book written about Stoic philosophy, written by an emperor of Rome that was never meant to be published. It was his diary, and in it there are so many words of wisdom on how to cope with life and how to think and how to be gracious and how to basically define yourself. That that is that is something I reread frequently.
Now let me now Marcus Aurelius. He was his a lot of philosophical work there. Now this is a very interesting question here. This is finances. What do you think is our purpose here on Earth as human beings in life?
Well, biologically, it's to reproduce.
Okay.
That's what it basically is, right? Anything beyond that either delves into the realm of religion or I guess basically just human or just benevolence, right? Religion's answer is typically to worship unto God, right? The benevolence, I mean, what do I think it should be? I think it should be one thing and one thing only: to leave the place better than we found it, right? That's basically it. To leave the place better we found it and do what we can to basically lift up the people who come after us to a better place. Otherwise, we're just leaving the opposite is just terrible, quite honestly. I mean, I want a better world for my kids. Who doesn't? And I want the world my grandkids grow up in to be better than that, and the great grandkids that I have beyond that I'll never meet. Right. So that should be the only thing we worry about. You have there's really I think there's really two polar opposite mentalities in this world. There's those who give back and those who take. Right.
Mm,
I have very little time for those who take in this world.
mm. Now those I'm assuming those are the pictures of your kids and behind you there.
A little bit dated, but yes, yeah, they're a
Yeah.
little
How old are
weird.
they now?
6 and 8.
Okay, all right. So I have a 5-year old, right? Who's gonna be five. I keep saying he's five, but he's gonna be five in a month. I already see it as five. He's already five. Now, in entrepreneurship, there's a lot of talk about balance. People like balance, balance, balance. Now you have two kids and you have a family.
Mm-hmm.
How are you able to juggle the business, staying mentally sane, and actually balancing the family?
Look, anyone who ever argue like work life balance is a myth, right? It's always
Hmm.
a push and pull tug of war as to how much time you're spending on each. I think the only thing you can ever really do is two things. A, always keep in mind to the fact that both are priorities and always make sure you make time for both. Otherwise, you're going to suffer. Um, and I think, frankly, your kids let you know if you're doing too much or too little, right? When they make comments about you not being around, when they basically seem sad because you're not in your presence, when they ask you to play with them, the reality is that that's time. Those are signals that you're not doing enough, right? And you can never really do enough. You're a parent, as a parent, you can never really do enough. And there are times where unfortunately they have to understand that daddy's got to work, right? Like it is what it is. I don't have any secret recipe to this. I just know that I have to spend time on both, and I have to endeavor to be better at both every day.
Mm. Uh, I was hoping you'd come up with a very fancy answer. So
Well, look, I
what
mean,
is
I'll give you an example of what not to do. It's funny. I mean, have you ever read
yeah?
the biography of Elon Musk? He basically like this guy's got you know, not exactly dad of the year. You know, his you can even read the stories up on that. But he talks about, like, you know, there it's talked about how little time he spends with his kids, and it's not good. And he also, even when at one point he was like, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, I need to get a new relationship. You know, how many hours a week do you think I need to dedicate to my girlfriend minimum? Right? Like when you get into those kinds of like equations of I can just fit this into a schedule,
Yeah.
you've already lost, right? You've already lost.
So no, no, don't schedule. Just okay.
No, it's you got to be there when you got to be there.
Got you. So what's next for you?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I don't know. I don't know. Continuing to do what I'm doing for sure. The same trajectory. I mean, if I just keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to be very, very self-satisfied, very satisfied, very happy. I think, you know, my first priority is just raising my family, right? Like that's it.
Mm,
My second priority is making sure that my clients succeed in everything that they want to accomplish. As for everything else that comes with me, I don't know. I'm the kind of person. Luckily, I'm the kind of person who's achieved enough that other opportunities are thrown at them consistently, and it's a matter of trying to figure out where and when to and how to spend my time. But really, it's hard to say. I just know that the future, it's bigger and it's better. That's what I got to work towards.
that's interesting. No, that's. Huh. No, I think we there's a lot of the discussed it in the book Marcus Aurelius Meditations. I definitely recommend you guys go check it out because
Hmm.
I love books, and I'm currently reading the book Blue Ocean Strategy, and
Yep, great book.
I'm pretty sure. And I think every business owner, if you're in business, it doesn't matter what business you're in, if in life, you need to go read that book because mindset of competition to a mindset of actually creating something where you know you're not in red flooded waters. I highly recommend you guys check it. And Jason, you any questions for me at all as we go ahead and end the live stream here?
I wasn't ready for that. You had a bunch of questions ready for me. I wasn't ready for yours.
Uh, no, it's perfectly fine. Yeah, guys, it was a pleasure having everyone on here. We had 400 viewers. It's good having you guys here, and I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream. And thanks.
Pleasure. Take care.